The United States is losing Norway in a resource war that will define the next 50 years, and most Americans have no idea it is happening. Norway just discovered the largest rare earth mineral deposit in Europe, worth potentially hundreds of billions of dollars, minerals that power everything from your smartphone to military drones. The State Department assumed Norway would automatically partner with us to develop these resources. They were wrong. Norway looked at American infrastructure, American timelines, and American reliability, and they are now building partnerships that deliberately reduce their dependence on the United States while positioning themselves as the alternative to Chinese mineral dominance. This is not about a single deal. This is about a systemic failure in how America competes for the resources that will power the 21st century. The question we are going to answer today is why our closest NATO ally no longer sees us as their first-choice partner, and what that means for your cost of living, your technology access, and your national security. Stay with me because the data we are about to uncover will change how you see the next decade. Part 1. The discovery that changed everything. Let me give you the specifics because this story has been buried under election coverage and inflation headlines, but it matters more than both. In June of 2024, Norway announced the discovery of the rare earth deposit in southern Norway, containing an estimated 9 million metric tons of rare earth oxides. That makes it the largest deposit in Europe and one of the 10 largest in the world. These are not decorative minerals. These are the materials that make modern technology possible. Neodymium for electric vehicle motors. Dysprosium for wind turbine magnets. Praseodymium for aircraft engines. Terbium for defense systems. Every single one of these elements is currently dominated by Chinese production and processing. Here is what makes this discovery a geopolitical earthquake. China controls approximately 70% of global rare earth mining and 90% of global rare earth processing. For decades, they have used this dominance as economic leverage, restricting exports during trade disputes and keeping prices artificially high. The last time China flexed this muscle was in 2010 when they cut rare earth exports to Japan during a territorial dispute over islands in the East China Sea. Prices spiked by over 400% in some categories, and Japanese manufacturers were forced to either pay the premium or halt production. The United States watched this happen and did nothing to build alternative supply chains. Now Norway has the opportunity to break that monopoly, and the European Union has designated the deposit as a strategic project under the Critical Raw Materials Act. This is the EU's attempt to reduce dependence on China by securing domestic supply chains. The United States should have been the obvious first partner for Norway in developing this resource. We are NATO allies. We share democratic values. We have the capital and the technology. But Norway is not treating us like the automatic first choice anymore, and that should terrify every American who cares about economic security. Here is the part that should make you pay attention even if you do not care about mining or foreign policy. The country that controls rare earth supply chains controls the price of the technology you use every single day. Your smartphone contains 17 different rare earth elements. Your laptop contains dozens more. Electric vehicles require up to 20 times more rare earth materials than traditional cars. If Norway decides to prioritize partnerships with Europe and Asia over the United States, we will be left paying premium prices for materials that our competitors get at cost. That is not a hypothetical. That is basic supply chain economics. Part 2. Why Norway is hedging against America. So why is Norway, one of our closest allies, treating the United States like a backup option instead of a priority partner? The official reason is that Norway wants to maintain strategic independence and avoid over-reliance on any single country. But that is diplomatic language. The real reason is that America has spent the last 2 decades proving we are an unreliable partner, and Norway has been taking notes. Let me walk you through the 3 systemic failures that are costing us Norwegian trust. Failure number 1 is infrastructure execution speed. When Norway looks at potential partners for developing the deposit, they need countries that can build processing facilities, transportation networks, and export terminals on aggressive timelines. China built over 31,000 miles of high-speed rail in less than 2 decades. The United States has fewer than 500 miles, And most of it does not even meet international speed definitions for high-speed rail. Norway sees a country that talks about infrastructure but cannot deliver it at scale. Let me give you a concrete example. The California high-speed rail project was approved in 2008 with an estimated cost of $33 billion and a promised completion date of 2020. It is now 2026. The project is not finished. The cost has exploded past $100 billion. There is no clear timeline for when passengers will actually be able to ride it. Meanwhile, China completed the Beijing to Shanghai high-speed rail in 3 years at a cost of $32 billion, and it has been operational since 2011, carrying over 300 million passengers per year. If you were Norway and you needed infrastructure built to move minerals from mines to ports, which country would you bet on to actually finish the job? Failure number 2 is political predictability. One of the most consistent complaints from European allies is that American policy changes dramatically every 4 to 8 years depending on election results. Norway is planning mineral development projects that will take decades to reach full production. They need partners who can commit to long-term trade agreements, regulatory frameworks, and financing structures that will not be renegotiated every time a new administration takes office. The United States cannot provide that guarantee. Our political system is designed for short-term thinking, and our allies know it. Failure number 3 is regulatory complexity. The United States has the most fragmented regulatory system of any developed country. To develop a major mining or processing project, you need approval from federal agencies, state agencies, local governments, environmental review boards, and often multiple courts when projects face legal challenges. The average timeline for permitting a new mine in the United States is 7 to 10 years. In Norway, the equivalent process takes 2 to 3 years. When they look at partnering with American companies, they see a system designed to slow down development, not accelerate it. Now here is the uncomfortable truth. Norway is not anti-American. They are pro-results. They have a finite window to capitalize on the global transition to green energy, and they are going to partner with countries that can help them move fast. If that is Europe, they will prioritize Europe. If that includes carefully managed partnerships with Chinese processing companies, they will do that too. The question is not whether Norway is making a mistake. The question is why America is not competitive enough to be their obvious first choice. But here is the question I promised to answer, and we are getting close. If Norway is developing the largest rare earth deposit in Europe and they are not automatically partnering with the United States, what does that mean for you? What does that mean for the price of your next car, your next phone, your access to renewable energy? That is where this story gets personal, and that is what we are going to break down in the next section. But first, I need to know where you stand. If you were leading Norway and you had to choose between a reliable but slow American partner with political uncertainty, or a faster European and Asian partnership that gets you to market sooner, which would you choose? Drop your answer in the comments because I am going to be reading them for the first 2 hours after this video goes live, and I want to know if you think Norway is being smart or short-sighted. Part 3. The American Soft Power Collapse. Let me tell you what this situation represents beyond mining rights and trade deals. This is the visible collapse of American soft power, and it has been happening in slow motion for years, but now it is undeniable. Soft power is the ability to shape global outcomes through attraction rather than coercion, through the appeal of your economic model, your innovation capacity, your reliability as a partner. For decades, America had more soft power than any nation in history. Countries lined up to work with us because we represented technological leadership, economic opportunity, and long-term stability. That is no longer the default assumption. Let me give you the context. Trust in American global leadership among European allies has fluctuated dramatically over the past 2 decades, declining sharply during certain administrations and recovering partially during others, but never returning to the levels seen in the early 2000s. In Norway specifically, polling shows increasing skepticism about whether the United States can be counted on to follow through on long-term commitments. That is not because Norway suddenly loves China or wants to abandon NATO. It is because they have watched America struggle with basic governance for 20 years, and they are adjusting their strategy accordingly. Now contrast that with how Norway views its own position. Norway ranks at or near the top of every major quality of life index. They have the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world at over $1.6 trillion, which means they have more financial flexibility per capita than almost any nation on Earth. They do not need American financial assistance. They do not need American military protection in the traditional sense. What they need is partners who can help them turn natural resources into economic value as quickly and efficiently as possible. And when they look at America, they see political gridlock, infrastructure decay, and an inability to execute long-term projects without massive cost overruns and delays. Here is where it gets uncomfortable for us. Norway looked at the American model and asked themselves why they would want to replicate our approach when other countries are building faster, cheaper, and more reliably. I'm not saying those countries have better political systems or better values. I am saying they look like better executors. And when you are trying to develop a multi-billion-dollar resource project with a limited window of opportunity, you want execution capacity, not philosophical debates about the superiority of democratic capitalism. This is the hidden cost of America's domestic dysfunction. Every time we shut down the government over budget fights, every time we fail to pass basic infrastructure funding, every time we prioritize short-term political wins over long-term strategic investment, we send a signal to the rest of the world that we are not serious about competing. And countries like Norway are listening to that signal loud and clear. Part 4. What this means for your wallet. Now let me bring this directly to your daily life because this is not abstract geopolitics. This is going to hit your bank account in multiple ways, and here is exactly how. First, the cost of electric vehicles is going to stay higher than it needs to be. The Biden administration set a target of 50% electric vehicle sales by 2030, but that goal depends entirely on access to affordable battery materials. Lithium-ion batteries require significant amounts of rare earth elements for motors and electronics. If Norway prioritizes supplying European and Asian markets over American markets, or if they simply do not have the processing capacity to serve everyone, American automakers will face higher input costs. The average electric vehicle in the United States currently costs around $46,000 compared to $35,000 for a gasoline vehicle. If rare earth material costs increase even 10% due to supply constraints, you are looking at another $3,000 to $5,000 added to the sticker price. Second, the renewable energy transition that every state is betting on becomes more expensive. Wind turbines use permanent magnets made from neodymium and dysprosium. A single large offshore wind turbine can require over a ton of rare earth materials. Solar panel production requires smaller amounts but still depends on rare earth processing for certain high-efficiency cell types. California, New York, and other states have legally mandated transitions to renewable energy, but they do not control the supply chains that make those mandates achievable. If rare earth prices spike because China still dominates processing and Norway prioritizes non-American buyers, those state mandates become significantly more expensive to meet. And who pays that cost? You do, through higher electricity rates. Third, consumer electronics across the board get more expensive. Every smartphone, every laptop, every television, every set of wireless headphones contains rare earth elements in speakers, screens, memory chips, and batteries. Apple, Samsung, Google, every major tech company depends on stable rare earth supply chains. If Norway develops the fund deposit primarily for European consumption and America continues to rely on Chinese-controlled supply chains, we lose negotiating leverage on price. That might sound abstract until you realize it translates to an additional $50 to $150 per device. Multiply that across every piece of electronics the average American household owns, and you are talking about thousands of dollars in additional costs over a decade. But here is the part that should make you genuinely angry. None of this was inevitable. The United States has rare earth deposits in California, Wyoming, Alaska, and other states. We have the technology to extract and process these materials. We have the capital to invest in domestic supply chains. But we chose not to because it was cheaper and easier to outsource to China. We allowed our domestic rare earth processing capacity to disappear entirely. The last major American rare earth processing facility closed in the early 2000s, And we have spent the last 20 years talking about rebuilding capacity without actually doing it. Now Norway has a massive new deposit, and we are not their automatic first partner because we have nothing to offer them that they cannot get elsewhere faster and cheaper. Here is my question for you, and I want a real answer in the comments. Would you personally be willing to pay 20% more for American-made electronics and vehicles if it meant building domestic rare earth supply chains and reducing dependence on foreign sources? Or do you think the free market should determine sourcing even if it means strategic vulnerability? I'm not telling you what the right answer is. I am asking what you would actually choose if the decision were in front of you right now. Part 5. The myth America tells itself. Now let me dismantle the biggest myth circulating in American policy circles right now, and that is the idea that our allies will always prioritize us because of shared values and historical partnerships. That narrative is not just wrong. It is dangerous because it prevents us from recognizing how much ground we have lost. The assumption behind this myth is that countries like Norway will choose America over competitors even when we offer slower timelines, higher costs, and less reliable execution because democracy and freedom matter more than efficiency. That might have been true in 1950 or even in 2000. It is not true anymore. Norway is not some small, economically desperate country that needs to pick a patron. They are one of the wealthiest, most stable, most technologically advanced nations on Earth. Their sovereign wealth fund is larger than the entire GDP of most countries. They do not need our money. They do not need our protection from imminent invasion. What they need from international partners is execution speed and technical expertise in resource development. And when they evaluate potential partners on those criteria, America does not automatically win. Let me give you a direct comparison. When Norway looks at developing rare earth processing capacity, they can partner with European companies that have extensive experience in complex chemical processing and environmental compliance, or they can look at American companies that largely exited this industry 2 decades ago and would need to rebuild expertise from scratch. The European option gets them to production faster with less technical risk. That is not a values judgment. That is a pragmatic business decision. Here is the other part of the myth that needs to die. The idea that if Norway does any business with Chinese companies, they are somehow betraying Western interests. Norway is developing the fund deposit specifically to reduce European dependence on China. But reducing dependence does not mean zero interaction. If a Chinese company has the world's most advanced processing technology for a specific rare earth element, and Norway can license that technology under strict oversight while keeping ownership and control of the resource, that is smart strategy, not capitulation. The United States does not get to demand exclusive partnerships when we do not offer the best terms. And here is the reality that American policymakers do not want to admit. Norway is a small country with a large resource discovery, and they are going to extract maximum value from it by playing multiple partners against each other. They will work with Europe for processing, with Asia for export markets, and yes, they will work with American companies where it makes sense. But we are one option among many, not the default choice. That is what losing soft power actually looks like in practice. Here is where I need your help. If you have made it this far in this video, you are clearly someone who wants to understand the systems that shape your economic reality, not just react to headlines. That is exactly what this channel exists to do. We dig into the uncomfortable data, the hidden dependencies, and the long-term trends that mainstream media ignores until it is too late. If that resonates with you, subscribe right now. Next week we are breaking down exactly how much Norway's healthcare system costs compared to America's and why they get better outcomes for half the price. The week after that, we are investigating why Norwegian workers have more purchasing power despite higher tax rates. This is not just about consuming content. This is about building a community that asks better questions and demands actual answers. So subscribe, turn on notifications, and drop a comment telling me what topic you want us to investigate next, because I take requests seriously. Part 6. The Arctic Power Struggle. Now let me take you deeper into why this matters beyond economics and mineral supply chains. This is about the Arctic, and the Arctic is rapidly becoming the most strategically important region on the planet. As global temperatures rise, Arctic ice is melting at rates that were not predicted even a decade ago, and that is opening up new shipping routes, new resource extraction possibilities, and new zones of geopolitical competition. Norway sits at the geographic center of this transformation, and whoever has influence over Norwegian Arctic policy has influence over the future of the entire region. Here is the geography that matters. The Northern Sea route along the Russian and Norwegian Arctic coast has the potential to reduce shipping time between Asia and Europe by up to 40% compared to traditional routes through the Suez Canal. For global trade, that represents trillions of dollars in saved time and fuel costs over the next 50 years. China has been investing heavily in Arctic shipping infrastructure for over a decade because they understand that access to this route fundamentally changes their trade position with Europe. Norway controls key port infrastructure, refueling capabilities, and logistical networks that make Arctic shipping viable. If Norway develops those capabilities primarily in partnership with European and Asian interests rather than American interests, we lose strategic positioning in the most important emerging trade corridor of the century. Now let me give you the military dimension because this is not just about commercial shipping. The Arctic contains an estimated 13% of the world's undiscovered oil reserves, 30% of its undiscovered natural gas, and as we now know, massive rare earth deposits like the Fensite. Whoever controls access to Arctic resources controls significant leverage over global energy and technology markets. The United States has been asleep at the wheel on Arctic competition. We currently operate exactly one functional heavy icebreaker, the Polar Star, which was commissioned in 1976 and is held together with duct tape and prayers. Russia operates more than 40 icebreakers with several more under construction. China, which is not even an Arctic nation, operates 4 icebreakers and is building more. If there is a resource dispute or a territorial conflict in the Arctic, we do not have the basic logistical infrastructure to operate effectively in the region. And here is the kicker that should concern every American. Norway has been increasingly cautious about foreign investment in its Arctic territories, particularly from China. In recent years, Norwegian authorities have blocked or heavily scrutinized Chinese attempts to purchase land, infrastructure, or companies with operations in sensitive northern areas. That is Norway protecting its own strategic interests. But here is the question. If Norway does not see the United States as a reliable alternative partner to fill that gap, who do they turn to? Right now, the answer is Europe. They are deepening Arctic cooperation with the European Union, with Sweden, with Finland. America is not leading that conversation. We are not even reliably at the table. Let me ask you directly. Do you think the average American voter understands how critical the Arctic is to our long-term national security and economic competitiveness? Do you think Congress is treating this with appropriate urgency? Or are we too distracted by culture war issues and partisan fights to notice that the strategic map of the world is being redrawn while we argue about pronouns? Tell me in the comments because I genuinely want to know if you think this deserves more attention or if I am overstating the risk. Part 7. What America needs to do. So what does the United States actually need to do to stop losing ground with allies like Norway? Let me give you the hard truth, and it is not going to be comfortable. We need to make massive, politically difficult changes to how we approach infrastructure, how we approach permitting and regulation, and how we approach long-term strategic planning. First, we need a comprehensive rare earth strategy that treats this as a national security priority equivalent to defense spending. That means federal investment in domestic mining, processing facilities, and research into alternative materials. It means streamlining the permitting process so that strategic projects do not take a decade to approve. And it means accepting that some of these facilities will face local opposition and building them anyway because national security sometimes requires overriding not-in-my-backyard politics. Second, we need to massively upgrade our infrastructure execution capacity. That does not just mean spending more money. It means reforming how we build things. We need to study why projects in Europe and Asia come in on time and on budget while American projects routinely double in cost and miss every deadline. That might require changing labor regulations. It might require reducing the number of veto points in the approval process. It might require accepting that perfect environmental review is the enemy of good enough strategic infrastructure. These are uncomfortable trade-offs, but our competitors are making them, and we are falling behind because we refuse to. Third, we need to rebuild trust with allies by demonstrating that we can be a reliable long-term partner. That means negotiating trade agreements that have bipartisan support and will survive changes in administration. It might mean creating new treaty structures that lock in strategic commitments beyond typical election cycles. It definitely means following through on promises and finishing projects we start. Norway and other allies need to see that America can execute, not just talk about executing. But here is the part that no politician wants to say out loud because it is electoral poison. All of this requires sacrifice. It requires either higher taxes to fund strategic investments or cuts to popular programs to reallocate resources. It requires accepting short-term economic disruption to build long-term strategic capacity. It requires telling voters that we cannot have low taxes, generous entitlements, and global economic dominance all at the same time. And in a political system that punishes leaders for telling hard truths and rewards them for promising easy solutions, I am not optimistic we will make these changes until we have lost so much ground that we have no other choice. So here is where we stand. Norway just discovered one of the largest rare earth deposits in the world, and the United States is not their automatic first-choice partner to develop it. That is not because Norway is anti-American. It is because we have spent 2 decades proving that we are slow, unreliable, and distracted by internal dysfunction. The consequences of this failure are going to show up in your cost of living, in your access to technology, in the price of the electric vehicle you might want to buy, and in America's ability to compete economically and militarily in the most strategically important region on Earth. The question is not whether this matters. The question is whether we are going to do something about it before it is too late. So here is your question of the day, and I want you to answer honestly. If you had to choose right now, would you rather live in a country that prioritizes low taxes and minimal government intervention even if it means losing strategic industries? Or would you rather live in a country that makes aggressive government investments in strategic infrastructure even if it means higher taxes and more regulation? There is no objectively correct answer, but your answer reveals what kind of America you want to live in 20 years from now. Drop it in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.